don't really know how to start this, so let me just start with the truth. I love my wife. I've loved her since the day I met her. We've been together for 7 years, married for 5, and for most of that time, I would have told you with absolute certainty that she was the person I'd spend the rest of my life with. We have 3 kids together, ages 5, 3, and our youngest, who's just about 10 months old now. The older 2 are healthy, happy, and full of life. The youngest? Well, the youngest is where things get complicated. He has a neurological condition that causes seizures, and according to the doctors, will probably mean he has a lifetime of challenges ahead of him. Some days will be good, others will be terrifying, and there's a chance that he'll never get to live an independent life because of this. That alone is enough to break a person, but that's not what's breaking me. What's breaking me is the creeping thought that my wife might be the reason behind our son's suffering. To be clear, I knew who she was before I married her. Back in her 20s, she partied a lot. She was the kind of person that would go too far, and on a few occasions, flirted with some disaster. Alcohol and cocaine were a big part of her story back then. It wasn't a secret, but by the time we got serious, that part of her life seemed firmly in the past. She was focused, grounded, and seemed like she was ready to build a life. And for years, she was nothing but a great partner and an amazing mom. So when we found out we were expecting our 3rd child, I wasn't worried. I knew that it would be hard. I work full-time and she's home with the kids, but we'd gotten through the first 2 together. I knew that we'd figure it out again. Except this pregnancy was different. She was more exhausted, more stressed, and more overwhelmed. I did my best to step up. I cooked when I could, cleaned, and I took the 2 older kids out of the house so she could get some rest. I wanted to do everything I could to make it easier on her, but I guess I didn't see just how much she was struggling. Or maybe she didn't let me see it. Well, one night, I came home from work and found her sitting on our patio with a glass of wine in her hand. It didn't seem like she was trying to hide it, but I know that she knew my thoughts about drinking while pregnant. I asked her about it, as calmly as I could. I told her that I didn't think it was a good idea. Not for her, not for the baby. That's when she sighed. She looked tired in a way that I just hadn't seen before. And she told me that she needed something to take the edge off. She admitted then that she'd been having a glass or 2 a few times a week, mostly when the days felt like too much for her. She hadn't told me about it because she knew that I tried to stop her, and she didn't want to argue. I'm not gonna lie, I was upset by this. I told her that it wasn't about being controlling. It was about the health of the baby. After a long talk that night, we agreed no more drinking, and I believed her when she promised to stop. My wife can accomplish some serious things when she puts her mind to it, so I wanted more than anything to believe her. When our son was born, he looked perfect. Tiny, beautiful, and all ours. But it wasn't long before the doctors noticed that something was wrong. Within a couple of hours of being here, he started having seizures. Some would last for only a moment. Others would go on for a minute or 2. It really didn't matter how long they lasted because they were all terrifying. Eventually, doctors were able to put a name to it. And while I won't get too deep into it here, this was a diagnosis that we could barely wrap our heads around. We were devastated, but we did what parents do. We accepted it. We figured that these challenges were just a part of our life now, and life just isn't fair sometimes. We vowed to do whatever it took to give our son the best life possible. Once baby boy was home, those first few months were brutal. Between the medications, the specialists, and the constant fear of the next seizure, we were stretched to our limits. Every waking moment revolved around his care. Our older kids, who once used to have our full attention, got whatever scraps of energy were left at the end of the night. We snapped at each other. We fought about little things. It was clear that we were tired, sad, angry, and terrified all at once. But through it all, I still believed that we were in it together, that we were partners. That was until the day that I found the bag. This was the result of a stupid, random accident. My phone had stopped working, and I needed to transfer my SIM card to a new phone, but I couldn't find that little PIN tool. so I went looking around the house for something small that would do the trick. After walking room to room trying to figure out what tool I was searching for, I settled on an earring. I went to my wife's jewelry box because Lord knows she has tons of those. First earring I pulled out, it was too wide. The second one I pulled out, the post wasn't long enough. So in my search, I went to the bottom compartment of the box, and that's where I found a tiny bag of white powder. Now, to be clear, I've never done cocaine, but I knew exactly what I was looking at, and in that instant, my stomach dropped. I immediately confronted her. She got defensive, angry. She accused me of snooping and of violating her privacy, but I wasn't snooping. I told her I'd just been looking for something to pop the SIM tray open, and I stumbled on it by accident. That's when the dam started to break. She just admitted it. Not just to having the cocaine, but to using it during her pregnancy more than once. At first, I thought I'd misheard her, but no. She said that there were days that she just couldn't keep up. Days where the kids, the house, the pregnancy just became too much. She told me she turned to it for a boost, for energy, for an escape of sorts. And then, just like that night with the wine, she tried to brush it off like it wasn't a big deal. I didn't know what to feel. Part of me broke for her. My wife was clearly drowning and she hadn't felt like she could reach out to me for help. I hated that she'd felt so trapped and alone, but another part of me was furious. Furious that she had chosen to use drugs while carrying our child. Furious that she had done it behind my back. But most of all, furious that our son might spend his entire life suffering because of choices she made, ones that she knew were dangerous. That argument didn't solve a thing. It just spiraled in circles for hours. Lots of anger, tears, and excuses. But one thing did become clear. I wasn't going to be able to stop thinking about this. Since that day, these thoughts have been relentless. Every time I talk to a specialist or plan for a future that looks nothing like we imagined, or when I watch my son seize, I think about that wine glass and that little tiny bag, about the trust that was shattered and the life that might have been different. I don't know how to look at my wife the same way anymore. I don't know how to forgive her. I don't even know if I should forgive her. I keep replaying all of this in my head. If she had just come to me, if she had said that she was overwhelmed, maybe we could have gotten her help. Maybe none of this would have happened. Or maybe it still would have. Maybe this condition was written into his DNA before he was ever even conceived. But now I'll never know. And it's that not knowing that's eating me alive. I'm also terrified for what the future holds. Because if this is how she copes when things get hard, by hiding, lying, and turning to substances, then how can I trust her with the hard days that are still to come? And let's be honest here, there's going to be plenty of them. This isn't some temporary crisis. This is the rest of our lives. I haven't told anyone about this. Not my parents, not hers, not any of our friends. It's too big and too shameful to say out loud. So I'm saying it here instead because I don't know what to do. Divorce has been on my mind a lot, and I hate admitting that. I hate even typing the word out, but it's there, and I just can't ignore it. I love my wife. I love the family we've built, but I also hate the lies. And I hate the thought that I might spend the rest of my life resenting her. I'm trying to be logical about this, trying not to make a decision fueled by anger or grief. We have 3 kids together, and they need stability. They need both of us, and I know that whatever choice I make will affect them more than anyone. But I also know that staying in a marriage where trust has been obliterated could be far worse than just leaving. Some days, I think I could stay and rebuild. Other days, I think leaving is the only way that I'll ever find peace. I bounce between those two realities every single day, and I don't know which way I'm leaning anymore. I wish I had some neat conclusion here, but the truth is, I'm lost, along with being angry, heartbroken, scared, and guilty, all at the same time. I look at our youngest and I feel this deep, overwhelming love. but also this grief for the life that he should have had. And then I look at my wife and I see the woman that I built a life with, while also looking at the person who might have destroyed part of that life forever. Maybe one day I'll find some clarity and forgiveness will come. Or maybe it won't. That part's too early to tell. All I do know is that whatever decision I make, it has to be one that's best for my kids. Not centered around my pride and not around my anger. Not even for this marriage. It's for them. Because they're the ones who are going to live with the consequences of all this, long after my wife and I have stopped fighting and the dust settles. The only thing I care about now is making sure that they have the best chance at a life that isn't defined by secrets, lies, or regret. I've always been pretty open about the fact that cannabis is a big part of my life. It's just my thing. I don't drink much. I'm not into the club scene, and being in a big loud crowd honestly makes my anxiety shoot through the roof. So instead of all that, I usually unwind in far quieter ways. Chill music, snacks, and a little bit of greenery. It helps me relax, keeps me grounded, and honestly, makes life feel just a little bit more manageable. And while I've had plenty of great nights thanks to it, there's one in particular that still makes me cringe a little bit. A night where I might have overdone it. Like, just slightly. Okay, maybe a lot. I'm 23 years old, juggling school and work, and I still live at home with my family. They're cool with me using cannabis. They don't use it themselves and they don't want me lighting up in the house, but they know that it helps with my anxiety, so it's not a big deal. And after a long week of classes and shifts, all I wanted was a quiet, stress-free weekend. That Friday was just one of those days where I could feel how badly I needed a break. I didn't have any assignments due, I had no weekend plans, just 2 days of pure nothing. So the second I clocked out of work, I opened my local dispensary's app and placed a pickup order before I even left the parking lot. That's one of the perks of living in a legal state. Getting weed is just about as easy as grabbing takeout. Well, 15 minutes later, I was at the shop smiling like a kid on Christmas morning. And because the universe apparently wanted to tempt me, this club was running a promo. Buy what I normally get, and they'd throw in a pack of edibles for a penny. Of course, I said, yes please. The freebie I got was a pack of sour apple gummies, 10 milligrams each, which is pretty standard here. I've had plenty of edibles before, and I know my tolerance pretty well. Usually 40 to 50 milligrams hits that sweet spot for me. So I figured 5 gummies would set me up for a perfectly chill night. When I got home, I did my usual routine. Pajamas, snacks, playlist, ready. I was in full Friday night reset mode. While I was getting comfy, I read the back of the gummy package and noticed something that I'd never seen before. The company was touting that their THC extract for this gummy was supposedly more bioavailable, meaning that it was meant to hit faster and harder, which I now understand was the universe's way of warning me. But in the moment, I just thought, oh cool, faster high works for me. So I did what I planned on doing. I popped 5 gummies without a second thought. They were tart, chewy, and had no overt flavor of weed to them. I remember thinking, wow, these would be dangerous for someone who didn't know what they were doing. Then I sat down to play the waiting game. About 20 minutes later, I start to feel the first wave. Warm, floaty, exactly what I was expecting. I was chatting with a friend on the phone, laughing at nothing, just totally vibing out. But about 15 minutes after that, I realized something weird. I wasn't leveling off. I was still ascending higher and higher by the minute. The silly giggles that I once had turned into scattered thoughts. My body started to feel heavy and my heart was racing. I suddenly didn't feel like talking anymore. I hung up the phone because even conversation felt too intense. I laid back in my bed, hoping that this feeling would pass. It didn't. My chest started to feel tight. I was sweating, and I began spiraling into that classic, oh my God, I'm too high panic. I kept trying to tell myself, weed can't hurt you. Nobody's ever died from this. But when your heart is thumping a mile a minute, and you feel like you're melting into the bed, not in a good way, logic doesn't really help. I tried everything. Splashing water on my face, opening the window for fresh air, lying on the floor, but nothing seemed to bring me back down. It had only been about an hour since I'd eaten the gummies, and I was more stoned than I'd ever been in my life. That's when the intrusive thoughts started creeping in. All I could think was, what if I need help? I didn't want to involve my family. They'd never let me live it down, nor do I think they'd really know how to help me out in this situation. Moving on to different ideas, I thought, what if I called 911? But I really didn't want an ambulance showing up at my house. So that's when I came up with the brilliant idea to just drive somewhere else and call for help there. Except, I'm sure you can realize I wasn't in any state to drive. But it took me plopping myself down into the driver's seat before I came to that realization myself. Okay, plan B. I'll order an Uber. But when the car pulled up, I panicked again. The idea of getting into a stranger's car while I was this high felt terrifying. So I canceled the ride while standing in my driveway, pretty sure as me and the driver were making eye contact. At that point, my brain had pretty much all but checked out. So I did the thing that I hoped that I wouldn't have to. I called 911 from my front yard. I don't even know what I said to the dispatcher. Pretty sure I was rambling about being too high and not knowing what to do. This guy was calm. He asked if I was safe and told me to stay put while help was on the way. Somewhere in the middle of taking direction from the dispatcher, I realized that I was now lying flat on my back in the grass of my front yard. Don't ask me how I got there because the last thing I remembered was standing up in the driveway. But for a few seconds there, I was able to breathe just a little bit easier. It was a relief knowing that help was right around the corner. I thought an ambulance was going to pull up to my house, a couple EMTs were going to get out, give me a once-over, let me know that I'm fine, which I think I knew at some level. And the night would just go on like I had planned. But because life has a sick sense of humor, the ambulance didn't show up quietly. They pulled up with lights flashing, illuminating my whole entire neighborhood. The two paramedics that got out of the ambulance slammed their doors. That commotion, in addition to the lights, I think stirred my family because before I knew it, my family had come outside to find me lying in the grass, talking to two EMTs. I just wanted to evaporate on the spot. The paramedics themselves were cool about it. They hooked me up to an IV, checked my vitals, and confirmed what I had already known, that I was fine, just way too high. One of them even laughed and said, "You know, you probably just could have slept this off." And yeah, objectively, I knew that. But in the middle of a THC-induced meltdown, rational thoughts aren't exactly easy to come by. They decided I didn't need to go to the hospital and handed me back over to my parents, who were standing there looking equal parts concerned and embarrassed. At least, that's how it felt to me. I'm sure I was projecting a little bit, but still, mortifying. The rest of the night was rough. I was still ridiculously high, sweating and shaking, and I ended up throwing up a couple of times before finally passing out for a solid 12 hours. Even when I woke up, I still felt a bit foggy. Those of you that do eddies, I think you know what I'm talking about. I showered, changed clothes, and eventually started to feel a little bit more like myself. But then I went downstairs and walked right into the parental lecture. Of course, they said they weren't angry, just disappointed, which honestly always feels worse. They talked about how embarrassed they were, what the neighbors would think, and how maybe I should rethink my own cannabis use. I couldn't even really argue because at that moment they had a point. I'd gotten way ahead of myself. The next few days were a mix of embarrassment for me and some self-reflection. I replayed just about every decision I'd made that night and realized how avoidable the whole thing had been. Those gummies? What I had left, I gave to a friend with a higher tolerance, but not before warning him to go slow. That's probably the biggest lesson that I took away from all of this. When it comes to edibles, you can always take more, but you can't take less once they're in your system. I also learned that if you do go too far, the best thing you can do is just ride it out. hydrate, distract yourself, try to relax. A friend of mine said that CBD really helps too, but calling 911 is rarely necessary, though I can't deny that in that moment, it felt like the only option that I really had. But maybe most importantly, I learned that being experienced doesn't mean you're immune to mistakes. I'd been using weed for years. I knew my limits, or at least I thought I did. Turns out, I did not. It's been a while since that night, but my friends still tease me about it. I'm officially that person. I laugh along with them now because honestly it is kind of funny in hindsight. And if telling my story keeps someone else from making the same mistake, then at least it's good for something. I still use cannabis. I still advocate for it. But I have a whole new respect for it now. And every time I look at a pack of edibles, I think about that Friday night and how I learned the hard way that even seasoned stoners can screw up. So yeah, that's the story of how I spent a night in my front yard, high out of my mind, with flashing lights and paramedics hovering over me. It's embarrassing, it's ridiculous, and it's 1000% my own fault. If anyone in my life ever asked me for advice on edibles, my answer's simple. Start low, go slow, and for the love of God, don't call 911 unless you absolutely have to. Hello Reddit, my name is Anna. Initially, I shared this story on another website, but many of the moderators over there suggested that I come to Reddit to confess it. So here I am. In 1988, I had an affair with Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, and in light of reading excerpts from Gaddafi's harem, I decided to share my story. Some who have heard this have suggested that I have Stockholm Syndrome. I personally can't say if that's true or not, but hearing this story, maybe some of you will gain insights as to whether that's accurate. I was raised by a single father. He worked as an FSO, and we moved around quite often. My mother was an Italian national whom he divorced not long after I was born. My father had a son from a previous marriage, and he wanted my brother and I to have contact with each other, although we had very little since he lived with his mother in New York City. My dad and I weren't particularly close, despite spending most every waking minute with each other. He had developed an addiction to pills, and while he was able to function, he remembered little of what happened during his binges. In '88, I was 15 years old. I was worldly, having been to most of Europe and a few far-flung countries. But I was also extremely naive, considering most of my social interaction was solely with my father. My dad was to attend a summit in a European city. I'd rather not say where this was, due to the fact that it might compromise my identity. So I naturally tagged along. I didn't attend the meeting, but I did accompany my father to the reception. It was a fairly nice affair. To a teenager, it was reminiscent of an award show. I was mostly interested in coming because Colonel Gaddafi was going to attend with his delegation. I believe that he had an interview with some foreign TV station. It wasn't long after the Tripoli air raids, and he was supposedly a very dangerous man, though I found him handsome. The Libyan table was perhaps 4 tables down from us, and I remember leaning back in my chair to see him. At some point, he looked in my direction and our eyes met. I immediately looked away and back down at my food. Well, after a few seconds, I looked back up and saw him still staring. I felt embarrassed. After dinner, my father retired for another night of drug-fueled oblivion at our hotel. Our hotel wasn't particularly fancy, but I got my own room since I was a big girl now. At some point, I remember hearing a knock at my father's door and him answering it, undoubtedly high. The hotel was one where there was a locked door between our 2 rooms, so I tried my best to listen in. It's a shame I didn't know the glass to the door trick at that point in my life. The person left my father, and then there was a knock on my door. I looked out, and there was this burly-looking woman in a dress suit. When I answered, she told me to come with her, that it was important, and my father already knew. She took me in a nice car to a fancy hotel in the city center. She yanked me around and was generally rude. She told me that Gaddafi had seen me at the reception and wanted to ask me a few questions. Naturally, I was terrified, thinking that I was somehow in trouble and about to be murdered. I met Muammar in his room. I was afraid at first, but after a fairly long conversation and a few drinks, milk, oddly, I began to feel fairly relaxed. His English was good, and he was rather soft-spoken. He was curious to know why I was staring, and he wanted to meet me personally. Now, for a socially deprived teenager, this attention from a grown-up was exhilarating. I remember laughing, but not really knowing how to answer. Now, I won't get detailed on what happened next, but suffice it to say that I was above the age of consent in that particular country, and I was willing. With me, there's a bit of cognitive dissonance with how he's been portrayed and how he was with me. Those two things are night and day. I don't know if he changed after me or if the other stories are lies, but I'd like to think that they were. He held me close during most of the night, talking about a number of things, sometimes going off in Arabic. I just sat and listened. I recall him saying that he and his wife were not doing well, and he had been very lonely. She blamed him for the air raids. He told me that I was a great comfort, and I would have made a good wife. I remember just flat out saying that I wanted to stay with him, let him take me away from my father and all the constant moving. He was quiet for a long while before saying that our paths were meant to cross only briefly, but that I would be his paradise. He was very kind and loving, certainly the best I've ever been treated in my life. At the end of the week, I was returned to my hotel and my father was up around lunch. I didn't mention my week, and he didn't ask. We stayed in that country for another 2 weeks before briefly returning to Malta. It was around the time that we were set to move again that I began to fall ill, vomiting like clockwork every morning. My father took me to a clinic to be treated for the flu, and that's where we found out that I was pregnant. He was furious, saying that I'd ruined my life. You know, all the stuff a dad would say to his daughter upon hearing such news. He asked who the father was, and I made up some lie about someone I had met at a bar while he was asleep in his room. He was terribly embarrassed and took time off to take me home. Thankfully for my sake, Malta had good relations with Libya, and I was able to send a letter to Muammar telling him of what had happened. He had an address where you could send fan mail through the consulate there. Well, nearly 3 months later, and we had moved back to the US. My father was considering sending me to my mother, but he was on the fence about it. I was taking classes at a local prep school when one afternoon he asked me if I had made a friend while holding up a letter covered in stamps and beat to hell and back. I shook my head no and took it from his hand. When I opened it, a slip of paper slid out with a letter. The paper was a visa of sorts, green border with a holographic stamp. The letter itself was handwritten from Muammar. I didn't get to read it closely because my dad put 2 and 2 together and snatched it from me. I recall it saying not to be afraid, that he had thought of me over the last few months and regretted not saying yes to me, that I was welcome to come if I so wanted and be a second wife, albeit secretly, and that I would be loved and cared for. I remember seeing the color drain from my father's face as he read it. He shook it in my face saying, "Who wrote this, Anna? Who?" He grabbed me by my hair and shook me. I confessed to everything. I don't remember much after that. He punched a wall. I could hear him yelling, but I don't remember what about. He drugged me to my room and locked me in it. I stayed there for the next 2 days. When he finally came around, he said that he had to take me to a gynecologist appointment. I got dressed and went with him. I felt like there was something wrong when we didn't go to my normal doctor, but a clinic that I'd never been to. The nurse took me back to a room and put an IV in my arm. I remember the doctor, or at least who I thought was the doctor, come in and say something to the effect of, "Relax, you won't feel a thing and this will all be over soon." I remember jumping up in this blind panic, yanking out the IV, slinging blood everywhere. The nurse tried to hold me down, but I nearly bit off her finger. I turned to go towards the door, but whatever drug they had put in that IV began to kick in. I felt lightheaded and I must have knocked something over because I remember hearing a clanging noise, and that's the last thing I recall. My dad took me home. We didn't speak. I went to my room and stayed there for 3 days, only leaving to go to the bathroom to try to clean myself. I bled for days. On the 3rd day, he came up begging me to eat something. I told him to just go away. He began to cry and told me just how sorry he was, and that I was to have a son. I ate dinner that night, and we never mentioned it again. In my life, I've attempted to have relationships with 3 other men. I slept with 2 of them. They were terrible experiences, and I swore off of men then. I had fallen in love with Muammar, and have never overcome it. I seriously considered taking my own life a couple of times, and even attempted to run away once I hit the age of 18. I never got another letter. My father became severely ill and died in the months leading up to the Libyan revolution. I was his main caretaker at the time, being that my brother lived so far away. My dad knew that he was dying, and he made a confession to me that there had been other letters. The letters came at roughly 6-month intervals until the visa had expired. He read them and burned them while I was away at college. He said that the only one that stood out was the last, coming just a few months before the visa was no longer good. It had read something to the effect of, "I understand your decision to no longer remain in contact, but at least grant me the privilege of sending a photograph of your and my child." That day, I made the decision to travel to Libya when the revolution had died down. I was so sure that it would, but it didn't. Funny how life works, isn't it? I exist now, but don't really live. I'm just here. Between the nightmares and crippling depression, I just exist. I keep going, if only for the memory of him. This has been my confession. After nearly 40 years, it's good to be honest about my life. So many who know me have never truly known me. I don't want attention. I don't want to write the next great tell-all. I don't want any TV interviews, just to tell my story here and now. I hope you enjoyed it.